Chapter 1 Barto and the Machine. Human society is a great machine. When parts of it break down, the resulting defect disturbs all who make use of the vital component, and may cause the entire apparatus to shudder and smoke. The loyal employee, the naive and trusting citizen, its defenders and detractors, the leaders, none are spared the hindrance of the malfunction. The bigger the part, the greater the upheaval and cost of repair. This is how Barto thought of things. He knew, based on the decision he made today, that the damage to the ever-turning gears of civilization would be extensive and lasting. When the bill comes due for repair, we may have to invent a new unit of measure to quantify it, then harness all of our human ingenuity to correct it. Barto thought to himself, feeling the slickness of sweat begin to build on his hands. He sat alone at his desk in a suit tailored to match his large round frame. He felt the cool breeze of the air conditioner tickling his scalp. It easily wafted through his thin gray hair, caressing his partially exposed brown scalp beneath. The skin on his face was remarkably smooth, the jolly eyes fit for laughter. Lines around his mouth and eyes told half the tale of a lifetime of telling and reacting to bad jokes, mostly at his own expense. His lips were thin and arched slightly upward, telling the other half of his story. But today, his normally jovial features were veiled in apprehension, reversing the direction of the normally upward lines of his face. Small glowing lines of light filtered into his office via thin openings between the industrial-sized shades covering the windows. The morning sun and the bustle of downtown San Francisco, hundreds of feet below, were blocked out, minimizing his distraction. Barto's eyes tracked a single beam of light from the window behind him. It bounced off of a metallic umbrella holder near his sealed office door, forming a small shadow behind it. The dark diversion held his attention for several seconds. Then a light from a small screen on his desk caught his attention. The device was black, with a thin rectangular shape, able to fit completely in the palm of his hand. It had been manufactured by Samsung, and like the smartphones of his youth, housed the universe within a galaxy of potential. Barto was old enough to remember the days of single-purpose cell phones. Now, he was old enough not to care about anything other than the basic functions of the gadget everyone referred to as a device. There was a message from Lily on the screen. It read, "Don't hesitate. You're making the right call and I support you. We will deal with the fallout together. The other two will have to get over it." He grinned in response, grateful for her friendship and support even after all of these years. Really, there wasn't much that he had to do. A simple voice command and it would be done. Yet, he hesitated, waiting for a phone call, a beep from his device, or some other source to act as an excuse to delay the inevitable. Barto slackened his tie to allow cool, recycled air to reach his chest, then cursed under his breath. "Why do I always tie the damn thing so tight? Even after all these years, I still make the same mistake almost every day." He interlaced his fingers together and rested his chin upon them as he leaned forward, thinking, stalling. As one of the founders of the organization, others viewed him as an intellectual, a leader. George Washington of the modern age. Yet, he had never been a decisive person. For many decisions in his life, big and small, he often relied on decision trees to weigh and consider his options. Under each canopy, time froze, providing him with ample time to contemplate potential actions and futures. He must have planted thousands of trees in his life. I'm a planter, just like Washington. He smiled to himself. The amusing observation made him less aware of his thundering heart and the dots of sweat on his forehead. The tree for this decision had been planted, and he had selected the superior option hours ago. The only thing left to do was execute. He had run the numbers, consulted with Lily, done his customary toilet time thinking, and after each activity had come to the same conclusion. The others may not be ready, but this is what we agreed on, how it has to go down. I never thought it would have to be me, but it must be done. He sat up straight in his chair with new confidence and sureness surging through him, then picked up the device from the surface of the desk. After punching in a series of long codes and bypassing the authentication gates, he came to the executive approval screen. Are you sure you want to proceed? It asked, in a small gray text box. Barto stared at the box, then gave the voice command. Yes. Then the final screen appeared on the device. He had to say the name of the order precisely, or it would not work. Enter executive order number, it prompted. The authoritative tone resonated from somewhere deep inside of him. The sound from his lips seemed to mix with the light waves sneaking into the great room, providing weight and sonority to his words. Execute Order DD5428. There was a pause as the device fulfilled his request. As the machine worked, Barto's mind began to create a list of possible events that could follow from his decision, each one more catastrophic than the last. Overwhelmed by the abundance of probable scenarios, he abandoned the effort. There's no way to tell what will happen now. Device still in hand, he dictated a voice message to Lily and the other founders, then sent it off. In under a minute, they would know what he had done, and nothing would ever be the same. Then he reached for his desk phone and called the number for air transportation, casting aside his acrimonious thoughts about flying to focus on his desire to leave San Francisco as soon as possible. A sweet-sounding, yet untrained artificial intelligence assistant answered the call. Their exchange was brief, but littered with awkward starts and stops. Another minor irritant for Barto. After 3 minutes, the voice asked, "When would you like to be in the air, Mr. Cooney?" Barto scratched his head. "By this afternoon." "Got it, sir. It will be standing by at 1300 hours."
Chapter 2 Father and Daughter. A distant buzzing drifted through the air, floating into her consciousness. Initially, she thought it was a component of the bizarre dream that her sleeping mind had conjured to entertain her. So she listened. Seconds faded into minutes as she strained the limits of her hearing. Frustration gave way to fatigue as she stood silent, unable to find the origin of the tone. The noise was accompanied by recurring visual elements of the dream: fields of grass, tinted with the color of ocean water, her father, herself, and an ancient computer monitor with a flashing blue screen awaiting an input command. With hopeful trepidation, she approached the glowing terminal, extending a trembling hand to a yellowed, brownish keyboard. Without hesitation, her young fingers began gliding across, sticking keys, attempting to manipulate the machine. Yet each keystroke failed to bring the machine to life. It remained dormant, unyielding, with only a blinking cursor winking mockingly at her entries, void of caring or empathy. It's broken. The thought flashed in her mind, repeating itself with the rhythm of the blinking command line cursor. Then the beeping sound began, first faintly, barely above an audible frequency. But eventually, the volume increased to an almost deafening tone after a few seconds, only to fade away until it became a quiet whisper again. Where is it? Why can't I find it? Her inability to find the source of sound made her feel lost in the blue void. A prisoner of the expanse, subjected to an unexplained wavering tone, her vexation rising along with the awareness of her thumping heart drew her back into her conscious mind. She lay there, with her eyes closed for a few moments more, grasping in vain at wispy dream fragments. It was an exercise in futility, but she forced herself into a momentary calm, seeking to extend her limited physical senses. After several seconds, she still heard the beeping. It was close, closer than she had ever been. What? Wait, it worked? Her eyes shot open. In a flurry of motion, she threw her thin sheet off her and rushed to the window of her room, flinging open the curtains, squinting through her sleep-clouded vision to see past the wide lawn and the imposing black gate at the end of a long driveway. The source of the sound had been a garbage bot performing his collection duties. The machine's shape in the form of an old-timey silver trash can was an ironic reality, not lost on her. It made her picture the old world of her father, a mixture of mismatched fashion styles, green lawns, and for some reason, mustached men converged in a sepia tone in her mind's eye. A caricature of a past she never knew or fully understood. The bot used alloyed arms to lift the black bag of refuse into a gaping dark hole in its center, letting the door glide shut after the waste was deposited deep within its interior. From her vantage point, she could not see evidence of the tiny explosion inside of the machine, turning the garbage into ashes and energy. But she was always curious about it, wanting to understand how they packed such a powerful explosion into such a tiny space. Ignition method? Fuel source? How? The unanswered questions left her with an uncomfortable in the dark feeling. She wasn't afraid of the dark, but she preferred the bright illumination of knowledge to guide her steps. The garbage bot continued its movement down the street, taking her tension with it. She let her shoulders relax and took a deep breath to fill her lungs. False alarm. How silly of me to think that I would be able to hold on to it, she thought, pondering the dream again. Her disappointment was quickly displaced by a strong desire to get her day going. Moving away from the window and around her bed, she picked up her device from its appointed position by her bedside. Her device was gold, adorned with a sticker of a rocket spitting a flame from its exhaust, another of a black infinity sign, and a third of a single white gear on the back. The decals were scratched and faded from countless transfers in and out of her pockets. A vocal command from her lips brought the limitless device to life. Calendar. Setting the device in an old yet functional robotic circular swivel, she angled it toward a barren wall behind her nightstand, waiting to view her calendar. But nothing appeared. Oh, damn it. I forgot to set it to project mode. She was still getting used to the new model with improved projection features. Project mode. Her voice produced a tiny echo in the room, a clear sign of sleep fog lifting from her mind's surface. The calendar flashed onto the wall in a complicated matrix of social and academic suspense dates. A hidden code only she and possibly her best friend and rival, Harpreet, could decipher. They had competed in all things academic ever since their fateful meeting during the Basics of Language Committee some 12 years prior. Both having been tutored at home by the finest artificial intelligence teaching programs optimized to their unique learning preferences, they became fast friends, leaving the other 5-year-olds behind. With perfect grades, both agreed to race to see who could test out of the committee the fastest. Her competitive nature manifested early on, and she won the contest by 1 day. That had been the beginning of a rivalry that continued to this day, with each girl taking the lead in every other contest, year after year. Both enjoyed the shared rivalry and friendship. It drove them to greater heights and kept life interesting. She found her mind wandering, but managed to focus it back to the projected calendar. Her vision focused on the date, June 14th, 2062. 2 events, one with a green rhombus, the other with a red pentagon in front of it, populated the line. A calculus lesson at 10 o'clock and dinner with Dad at 1900. A light day. Fei-hao. Plenty of time to chill. Sunlight, warm and bright, made its way through the window, eating her skin. I should get going. She made her way to the body-length mirror, fastened to the back of her door, and admired herself for longer than she wanted to. A single gold-colored shirt and an old yet reliable pair of purple panties were all she wore. Her long black hair was a mess, falling in every direction except down. Gangly long arms appeared to sway in the breeze of the air conditioner. Her eyes, umber brown, shining and thin, reflected brilliance, hinting at unrealized greatness. She allowed a small smile onto her lips at the thought of her eyes. They projected her presence and intellect and made her more memorable, unforgettable. Some told her that her gaze was as intense as it was beautiful. She tended to agree with that observation. Her face was slim and flat, with a small nose set in the center. Her eyes scanned downward toward her, in her opinion, unremarkable breasts, when she noted a tiny red swell on her cheek. It was sensitive to the slightest prod from her finger and stung whenever the muscles of her face moved. She twitched her face several times to confirm its presence. A pimple. Great. She reached for nearby facial cream in her nightstand and began to methodically apply it to the red menace. As she made tiny swirls with her finger, a knock on the other side of the door startled her. Jinhua, are you up? The voice of her father resonated clearly from the opposite side of the door. Yeah, I am. I'll be out in a minute. Jinhua finished applying the cream, then hurried to her closet and to dress herself. The night before, she had set aside a simple green t-shirt and shorts. The clothes swayed on plastic white hangers, undisturbed, until Jinhua hastened to rip them down and throw them on her body, after changing out of her sleepwear. She hadn't realized how behind her usual schedule she was. Damn dream, stupid trash bot. When she opened her door, her father stood before her, a neutral expression on his face. You have to get ready for committee. He paused, noting his daughter's uncharacteristically disheveled appearance. Did you sleep all right? There was concern in his tone. He knew that she was usually ready to go by this time in the morning. I slept great. Are you heading to the office? He was dressed in a sharp-looking steel-colored suit, accompanied with a sky-blue dress shirt. The tie was neatly pressed, accented with cerulean and white stripes. It looked new, even though she had seen him wear it off and on ever since she was little. His face shared Jinhua's features, but it was wider and rounder, making his brown eyes less pronounced to a casual observer. A full head of gray hair sat above the chiseled wrinkles carved at specific points on his face. Her father's face reminded her of a weather-beaten statue. After decades exposed to the elements, it had history and related a different story when viewed from distinct angles. Every Wednesday, he made the 2-hour journey down to Sacramento to meet with the city government down there. Though he never really discussed the details of the meetings, he always came home with a mantle of sadness about his slim shoulders. I'm about to leave right now. You know how slow the bus can be, he said. Slower than the orbit of Mars. Jinhua covered her mouth to conceal a giggle. Her father chuckled as well. Li Ma looked at his daughter. The little girl turned young woman, now 17 years old. In a flash of nostalgia, he recalled the first time that he took her to the Powerhouse Science Center in Sacramento. She was only a girl then, but she already had a sparkle in her eyes whenever she viewed something she liked. The sparkle appeared as soon as they entered the planetarium. The infinite collection of projected stars seemed to stretch beyond the walls of the physical space, swallowing him and his inquisitive daughter by his side hole. Though the room was packed with a sprinkling of other parents and a class of elementary school children with chaperones, it felt like they were the only two in the room. At that moment, it was Li and Jinhua's planetarium. Li had watched her eyes glowing with wonder, captivated by the endlessness and untold frontiers of space. Swirls of overwhelming emotion, threatening to break the surface of his stoic veneer, manifested as a hint of satisfaction and silent joy on his face. Jinhua was oblivious to his gaze. Her entire being was focused on the astronomical projection. To her child mind, the blanket of stars beamed back at her, calling her to wonder, imagine, and explore. My future is up there, she had thought. Ever since that day, Li had tapped all of his connections within and even outside of the organization to find her the finest resources and mentors to fuel her interest in space, science, and mathematics. First, he started her out on books for children, but she quickly devoured them and subsequently surpassed all of her peers in her honors basic space science committee. He found his old Arduino robot kit, thinking that it would serve as a suitable challenge for a 9-year-old. But by her 10th birthday, she had designed 3 of her own projects with no assistance from him or any of her committee scholars. It was unheard of within the organization for someone so young to study directly under a scholar, but with a few backdoor connections, he had made it happen for her. She was truly gifted. Dad? Are you okay? Jinhua nudged Li back from his thoughts. Fine, he smiled warmly. Don't forget, dinner at 7 tonight. I'll be there. Jinhua looked back at her device in the swivel, feeling slightly embarrassed. You know, we don't have to go out. We can just eat something here. No, we should. It's not every day they let teenagers into the junior space cadets. It's a big deal. She didn't protest. Despite all of her academic success throughout her life, it still felt awkward when others talked about it directly, even if it was her dad. Don't be late. He leaned forward and gently kissed her forehead, then walked down the long corridor toward the staircase to go downstairs. His small, yet powerful footsteps left faint impressions on the thick carpet as he walked away. There was a time, many years ago, when she would walk behind him to try and fill those footprints with her own tiny feet. Jinhua felt the urge to follow him now, but stopped herself when she remembered that her feet were slightly larger than his now. Instead, she stood and watched the impressions for a few seconds until they were completely swallowed by the carpet material. Have a good day, Dad. I love you. Chapter 3. Frivals. As soon as Jinhua stepped outside of her house, a blast of heat slammed into her face, causing her to gasp. It took her body a few seconds to adjust to the drastic difference in temperature. Before she left the house, she had picked up an object that appeared to be an ocean blue-colored bar leaning in a dusty corner of the expansive entryway of the house. The pole was 2.5 long, smooth, and was her preferred method of transportation around town. Perfect day for rippin'. Jinhua smiled at herself as she gripped the bar. It reminded her of how far she had come since she had purchased it for her birthday 3 years prior. In those days, all she had wanted to do was finish her homework so she could ride her ripboard with Harpreet. She spent days learning how to deploy the board's retractable wings from the bar. At first, treating the device as a delicate object, then trying to add flair to her board deployments. After about a week, she moved on to the analysis phase. She had meticulously documented the makeup of the various composite materials of the personal transport: aluminum alloy, painted fiberglass wings, and some kick-ass grip tape. After another few days, she was ready to ride. The first race against Harpreet had ended in crushing defeat. Jinhua hadn't quite worked out the optimal positioning for her levser, the vital balancing component without which there was no levitation. No levitation meant no ribbon. A misplaced levser meant an uncentered magnetic field, which bungled the ripboard's fickle glide profile when the wings were deployed. These were facts unknown to Jinhua the first time she stepped on the board, real-world gems of experience that her scrutinizing analysis could not account for. During that first race, her slipshod foot placement and graceless handling of the levser had left her off balance and slow. A sharp turn at a high speed was all it took to send her flying onto the street, leaving a deep gash on her knee. It was a mistake she never made again. The bitterness of that loss fresh in her mind, she grasped the pole and hastened out the front door, locking it behind her. By the time she reached the imposing black security fence at the entrance of the driveway she was already beginning to feel beads of sweat forming on her exposed forehead. Wiping the perspiration away with the back of her hand, she continued to move as if she had no place to go. She pulled out her identification card from her pocket and held it toward the gate scanner. The card was tomato red in color and housed her picture, social security number, driver's license number, links to her major bank accounts, medical records, as well as money. All of the information had somehow been smashed within its microscopic computer components. I can't believe my entire life is on this card. She always had the same thought whenever she used the thin slice of technology. The all-in-one card was convenient, yet it made her feel vulnerable to have the entirety of her person housed within one easily pilfered or misplaced item. The security panel made a series of beeps, signaling that her card had been accepted. The old black gate emitted the sound of aged metal on slightly oxidized tracks as it slid open. Jinhua sidled through the opening to hasten her trip. The heat of the morning was already beginning to make its ever-warm presence known to her face and skin. Upon reaching the street, her device chimed in her tiny shorts pocket. With practiced skill, Jinhua pulled it out and examined the screen. The message from Harpreet was brief, yet provoked an excited smile onto her face. Barter race? Meet at the Old Veterans Park at 10? Jinhua dictated a voice message reply. I'll be there in 5. A small sticker of a checkered flag accompanied her words on the display screen. Within a second, the device was back in her pocket. In a fluid motion, she used an underhanded swing to fling the blue pole in front of her, while simultaneously activating the wing deployment. Sky blue wings extended from the pole, ready to accept her feet. Before it hit the concrete with a dissonant clang, a noise she had named the sound of shame, Jinhua expertly positioned and activated her levser at the precise moment, then leapt toward the hovering board with style. The sun gleamed, and the ripboard took flight just as her feet landed on the safety of reinforced grip pads. She was suspended only by the harmonious equilibrium between the balancing forces of the levser, her stance, and the board. I won't lose this time. With a determined look on her face, she kicked at the ground, propelling the board forward. 5 minutes later, Jinhua arrived at the park to find Harpreet waiting under the shade of a large tree. In her jean shorts and burgundy tank top, she stood tall, with her arms at her side, hands open, eyes closed, as if she were an offering to the sun. Just as they had competed in all things related to school, so too did the two young women often compare their physical characteristics, as if they were professional athletes preparing for a championship. As Jinhua approached the unaware Harpreet, she mentally compiled a list of random attributes, assigning herself or her best friend rival, her own created word, as the victor. Height, her, only by 2 inches. Weight, definitely her, by several pounds. Chest size, Harpreet. Hair length, draw. Intelligence, don't make me laugh. Me. Smile, I guess her. Ripboard skill, me by a mile. The mental exercise made Jinhua grin to herself as she floated toward her friend, whose cinnamon-toned skin glistened with a film of sweat in the morning heat. When she was close enough, Jinhua jumped off to the side of the ripboard at the optimal position, retracting the sky-blue wings and kicking the pole back into her right hand in a smooth fashion. It had taken her months to master the movement, and she was proud of it. "Practicing your mountain pose?" Jinhua said in a soft voice. Harpreet's eyes fluttered open. A big grin formed on her lips. "Gotta do something in this heat. It's so hot. And it's only 9:30. "Yeah, it is. I think it's supposed to get up to 116 degrees today. Hot enough to cook a whole meal on the sidewalk," Harpreet said. Both girls laughed. Harpreet put her hands on her waist, sticking her chest out. "You ready to lose?" Her tone was challenging, defiant. She reached for an orange pole leaning against the tree, then twirled it in her hands, thrusting it down near her feet in dramatic fashion, waiting for Jinhua's usual reaction. A reaction that never came. Something's on her mind. I wonder what. "Hey, you all right?" "I had the dream again." "Which one? The one about Derek?" "No!" Jinhua slapped her arm with enough force to sting, but not to bruise. "And ew." Okay. Just had to be sure," Harpreet said, laughing. "You mean the one about the broken computer, right?" What could it mean? Harpreet stood silent for a moment. Striking a pensive pose with arms crossed, chin on fist, she looked at Jinhua, wanting badly to find answers or explanations where both knew there were none. She looks so vulnerable sometimes. After a minute of the ambient noises of nature, people walking by in low conversation, and the occasional vehicle passing by, Harpreet spoke. "Do you know what would help you right now?" "What?" "A little bit of ripping. You always feel better after that." Harpreet placed a warm, slightly sweaty hand on her shoulder. Jinhua smiled. The unexpected contact was helpful. The details of dream fragments still lingered in her mind, but she was ready to let them go, to allow them to drift away in the wind behind her board. "You're on." "That's my girl," Harpreet said, jumping with excitement. With flair, she waved her orange pole around her head and tossed it at the ground, while in the same instant activating her levser with the opposite hand. Jinhua flinched when she heard the sound of metal clashing against the sidewalk. Harpreet fell backwards onto her backside, letting out a string of exaggerating expletives in English and Punjabi. "God damn it! One day I swear I'm gonna get that thing that you do down. Jinhua giggled. One day. Good thing you fell on your oversized safety cushion. Harpreet stood up as a group of crows vacated a nearby tree at the sound of her laughter. No kidding. If it were you, you would have probably shattered a hip. Hey, mine's just taking longer to inflate. Both girls laughed, extending the moment of levity. Harpreet redeployed her ripboard, activating it with more caution this time. As she stepped her right foot onto the wings, a look of surprise made her eyebrows arch and her eyes grow wide. Her hand dug her device out of her shorts to check the notification. Shit. What is it? Jinhua asked with concern. Committee time got moved out. Apparently, old Master Scholar, MS Rhodes, is bringing a new student from SAC and wants us all there early. How long do we have? Harpreet brought the device closer to her face, as if she were an old woman with a vision impairment. 5 minutes. Lines of determination drew themselves onto Jinhua's face. Then we'd better rip it. Her Frival mirrored her expression, returning a challenge-accepting smirk. She lowered her center of gravity, ready to begin the contest. Ready? Harpreet nodded, hovering her right leg at a 45-degree angle above the widened sidewalk for a stronger first kick. Go! Chapter 4. A New Society. The feeling was electric. Jinhua felt the fresh rush of adrenaline propelling her long legs to thrust her through the open air in front of her. Each kick was precise, optimized to give her maximum force, while keeping the amount of time off of the ripboard to a minimum. Half an inch in front of her, Harpreet's attention was just as focused on winning the race. Her balance was questionable, but what she lacked in grace, the power and length of her legs more than made up for, making her an even match. After passing under the old Highway 99, Jinhua nearly lost her balance as she weaved through a throng of elderly walkers casually enjoying a morning chat. A man with a sun-spotted, warm beige complexion mumbled obscenities as she and Harpreet cut through. Going left! Harpreet shouted from up ahead. Jinhua quickly adjusted her trajectory, wondering why she had not taken a right on Gray Avenue toward the old mall and their committee meeting, which was scheduled to begin in 3 minutes by the time on her device. Where is she going? Let's see if you can keep up. Harpreet's thoughts rushed by like the wind under the wings of the board as she gave a hard kick, widening her lead. Jinhua's board edged only 6 inches behind, gliding over large cracks and great circles of discolored gray in the sidewalk. The filled holes were grim reminders of a flood disaster that had killed millions and left the entire city underwater for months, years before her birth. When was the flood? Was it in the 20s? Or maybe 30s? She never could get historical numbers right. Unless the figure was attached to science, her memory, like an efficient computer operating system, flagged it for disposal, then tossed it into the digital dustbin. They had reached the intersection of Washington and Gray Avenue. Distracted by her thoughts, she gasped as Harpreet made a sudden U-turn, cutting across the width of the street, without pausing to look for oncoming people or cars. Safely on the opposite side, she resumed her kicking and gliding, throwing up tiny rocks every time her foot touched the concrete. "Got you, loser!" Harpreet yelled over her shoulder. "Damn you, Harpreet. I'm not gonna lose." Jinhua made a swift U-turn across the street to follow her. She looked right, becoming fixated on a large white pickup truck that was headed right for her. Panicked, she sped up, narrowly reaching the other side of the street before being struck by the honking vehicle. What she hadn't seen was the hatless middle-aged cyclist who had turned onto the street between her and Harpreet's rapidly shrinking frame at this point, some 15 feet down the sidewalk. By a narrow margin, Jinhua avoided the man, who had stopped in the middle of the sidewalk with a dumbfounded look on his face. She attempted to shift her balance, but acted too late and plummeted onto the sidewalk, her roll dampened by dry grass under a small tree. As she staggered to her feet, the sting of a cut registered in her brain. Warm blood trickled down to her shin. Harpreet rushed back down the street. A look of triumph was quickly replaced by concern. "Wow, crazy wipeout. You okay?" Harpreet reached out her arms to clasp Jinhua's slim shoulders. She looked her up and down, performing a motherly scan. "Nothing looks broken." "Thanks, Doc," Jinhua said. Harpreet dusted clay-colored dirt from Jinhua's shoulders and arms, as a devilish grin crept onto her face. "Looks like I won." Jinhua gave her a playful slap on the arm. "Looks like it." Her eyes fell to her bleeding knee. The gash looked like a jagged red mark, oozing a steady stream of dark blood. She applied pressure using a single tissue from a small plastic pack she carried in her back pocket, a habit she had picked up from her father at a very young age. "Always good to have them on you," he had told her on some random day in the distant past. Now, she was thankful for the advice. Harpreet clenched her teeth and tensed her jaw at the sight of it. "Looks pretty deep. Might have to hit the market to get it wrapped up." "Ew. I'll probably have to give his daughter ripboard lessons in exchange. So boring. She just runs around with the pole the entire time and can't even open the wings," Jinhua complained. Harpreet shrugged. "Maybe you can trade the babysitting time for something else." The mocking tone bled skepticism. "Doubtful." Jinhua exhaled frustration, glancing down at her device with her free hand. She remembered that the committee meeting had begun 5 minutes ago. Shit, we're late. Harpreet's expression remained unchanged. She was undaunted by the threat of being tardy. "Is that right? Okay then. Let's get going, Space Cadet." It didn't take long to make the short walk to the old Yuba Sutter Mall and make the exchange. Jinhua recalled through rose-tinted nostalgia endless hours roaming the rows of stalls of the barter market with her father as a young girl. The experience left a lasting impression on her psyche and stoked a sense of home within her, a comforting feeling. The open-air market of the old world clashed in broad daylight with mid-21st century technology. The result was a uniquely distinct ambiance, characteristic of all Conville barter markets nationwide. It was possible to trade money, credit, or any type of service for almost anything here. Biohacked humans hawked t-shirts, beside heavy-set, clear-skinned, middle-aged artisans, craftsmen, and specialists of all disciplines. A group of farmers traded baskets of almonds for the latest digital entertainment, a source of infinite pleasure and intrigue. Music from various sources mixed in the air around the girls as they walked the main path through the market, greeting friends and neighbors along the way. Harpreet raised her nose, large nostrils flaring, in response to the smell of fresh baked bread, honey cinnamon rolls, mangoes, and chocolate drifting in the air around them. Her eyes followed her stomach's calling. Though hungry too, Jinhua urged her forward and through the increasingly dense packs of early morning shoppers and traders. Her bent-over position, holding bloody tissues over her knee, was beginning to attract unwelcome attention. The trip to the doctor's stall hadn't lasted long. He was an old man with a stubborn-looking face, but was caring at heart. His bushy white mustache contrasted with dark brown skin, but also made his teeth appear brighter than they were. Dr. Ross had been a longtime friend of Jinhua's father, Li, and always made time for his daughter's cuts and bruises. Harpreet stood by with the vigilance of a well-paid mercenary as the doctor sanitized and wrapped the afflicted knee. After services were rendered, he scanned her all-in-one life card. Though his daughter was at home sick, the scan digitally obligated Jinhua to provide ripboard lessons at some unknown date in the near future. She was thrilled to escape the lessons for the moment, but dreaded the day when she would have to make good on the debt. There was no getting out of it. The consequences for trade jumping, as it was colloquially known, worked on a tiered progression system. The first offense was a suspension of services from the aggrieved person's specialty, in this case, medical services, for 1 week. The second was a 30-day suspension from all similarly categorized services throughout the entire Conville, which in her case would be no access to local medical care at all. The third and final offense was potential expulsion from the Conville. Though Jinhua had never heard of anyone actually being removed, she imagined that getting back in and re-establishing trust within the community was a monumental task that few were willing to undertake. So it was better to keep your promises and pay your debts as quickly as you were able. Her knee wrapped, Jinhua walked with a slight limp behind Harpreet, weaving through the growing crowd with quick steps on their way to the community center. Once inside, It took them another minute to reach the back of the building. The committee room was located in an old furniture store. The large open space where once upon a time, eager retail workers showcased overpriced sofas, beds, dining room tables, and cushions, had been partitioned off by tall white room dividers that did not quite reach to the ceiling. The dividers could be rolled by a very strong person or a machine to rearrange the layout of the committee rooms at any time. This allowed them to be adaptable for almost any academic purpose. Jinhua had heard that it had even served as a physical fitness committee room at one point in time. The rumor crossed her mind as she and Harpreet arrived outside of the door to their committee room. A simple door housed within one of the wall dividers. Jinhua felt as if she had completed a brisk warm-up in a gym committee, heart thudding and breathing uneasy from the exertion of the race and her power walk. Made it. Only 15 minutes late, Jinhua thought. She opened the door and walked casually to her seat in the center of the space, ignoring the pairs of eyes of her 10 committee mates. Most gawked at her wrapped knee and overall disheveled appearance with curious glances, each forming a personal narrative concerning the cause of her rough image. Mind your own business, Harpreet snapped in an echoing whisper. Jinhua flashed her a grateful glance as they both sat and adjusted themselves into their seats and began to remove their needed supplies from a locked compartment under the desktop. Jinhua held her all-in-one card to the desk, then heard the click of the lock, concentrating on organizing her supplies to take her mind off the events of her morning so far. When she was ready, she straightened her back and her face switched into academic mode. Her pupils widened like a camera aperture. Facial muscles relaxed. Her lips formed a perfectly straight line. It was the position of a model student, one any teacher would be delighted to see on the first day of school. Eyes staring straight ahead, she realized for the first time that their instructor was not there. Jinhua swiveled her head as if it were a security camera around the front of the room, but saw no sign of him. Hey, where's Master Scholar Rhodes? Hasn't showed yet. A dark-haired man with a brown complexion and a serious face spoke. No idea where he's at. Thanks, Derek. Harpreet cast a flirtatious wink in his direction. He seemed not to notice the gesture and returned his attention to a video playing silently on his desk screen. He'll come around eventually. He knows he wants all this, Harpreet said, bringing a flask of water from under her desk to her lips, viewing him out of the corner of her eye. Jinhua shook her head. Her mind was still on MS Rhodes. Creeping concern replaced the look of academic readiness on her face, bit by bit. He's never late. I wonder if something happened. In the next moment, they both heard the heavy footsteps of MS Rhodes approaching just beyond the thin wall. The door opened slowly, and MS Rhodes entered the room, squeezing his fat body through the door frame. A few steps behind him, a young man with a quiet countenance walked in. Instantly, Jinhua felt a large quantity of blood gather in her face at the sight of the youth. Who is that? Chapter 5. The New Kid. The boy was gorgeous. He towered over MS Rhodes at about 6-something feet tall, with well-groomed brown hair. He wore plain white jeans and a royal blue t-shirt that revealed the slight curves of a developing muscular chest connected to his 2 noticeably thinner arms. His 2 hazel eyes gleamed under the humming fluorescent lights while they scanned the room. "Don't stare," Jinhua said to herself. But the warning came too late. She felt the keenness of his gaze lock onto her, running over the skin of her face as if etching every detail of it into memory in order to reproduce it with flawless accuracy at a later date. The intensity of his glare made her face grow warm under the buzzing lights of the room. Her eyes darted to the empty space on her desk in front of her, providing a grounding moment of calm. Next to her, Harpreet noticed her discomfort, mouthing the words, "He's hot," with hushed lips. She was entertained by the mystery boy's effect on her best friend. The boy was a paragon of youth and strength, which made their instructor, MS Rhodes, appear older, fatter, and more drained than usual. In Harpreet's mind, she made an attempt to picture her committee scholar as a young man. Perhaps he had looked like the new boy at some point, and was a young scientist with hopeful dreams of being a changemaker in physics? Maybe he had lofty dreams of ending water scarcity and destroying the millions of tons of plastics in bathtub warm water oceans? She envisioned the route of his descent into academic corporate stupor. What went wrong? Too many compromises? Too many empty promises? Too many false victories? She tried to see his former greatness, yet could only see a man curved and bitter from a lifetime serving as a key component in a sputtering machine. A wave of sadness washed over Harpreet at the thought. She returned her eyes to the boy to make it go away, intrigued by Jinhua's visible response to his entrance. MS Rhodes began to speak in a droning tone. "Students, this is Daniel. He's been approved to join our committee by the Citizens' Council." A sudden coughing fit interrupted his speech. He pulled a small miserable cloth out of his pocket to spare his audience from the expectorants shooting from the depths of his lungs. "Damn smoking. I knew I should have given it up years ago." After several seconds, he caught his breath, using a high amount of restraint to suppress more coughs. He's just moved here from Sacramento, so please welcome him to our committee with open arms. He gestured unceremoniously toward the youth. The boy gave a small smile, accompanied with a slight waving of his hand to acknowledge his new classmates. Jinhua pretended to busy herself on her screen to avoid his eyes. Out of the corner of her eye, Harpreet observed her, entertained by her rattled state. The other students gave a curt acknowledgement of Daniel's presence, but quickly returned to their respective personal worlds of physics notes and videos. They didn't seem excited for another person to join the committee, no matter how good-looking he was. As she did her best to avoid Daniel's eyes, Jinhua thought of a cartoon she used to watch when she was very young. It depicted old-world school life with farm animals, representing all of the characters in the school. The show focused on Wendell, a talking pig, and his friends as they teamed up to foil their antagonist teacher, a cyborg human named Mr. Jones. Most of the episodes ended in Mr. Jones' humiliating defeat in comedic fashion at the hands of Wendell and his friends, which always brought a sense of joy and justice to her then young mind. One day, her dad watched an episode of the show with her. The only thing she remembered was his comment after the credits were rolling. Things are different now here in the Comvilles, but many things about human nature remain the same. People will always be people and fight for dominance over others, he had said. The word stuck in her head for weeks afterward. It would be another decade before she clearly understood the weight of his words. Nobody wants another competitor, Jinhua thought. The reaction of the committee reflected this sentiment. The rest of the morning's events were an afterthought for Jinhua. It was rare for MS Rhodes to lecture for an entire session. He simply did not have the stamina for it. However, he seemed to be especially passionate about their unit on thermal physics and talked in short bursts in between violent coughing fits for the entire time. Daniel had taken an empty desk closest to the windows of the committee space and arranged his digital notebook and 2 digital ink pens with geometric precision in front of him. He occasionally looked to the bustling barter market outside, but was primarily focused on listening to MS Rhodes. Jinhua did her best to focus during the lecture, but the pleasant seed of attraction flowering inside of her distracted her usually laser-focused academic brain power. She caught herself daydreaming about Daniel, in desperate need of more information about the mysterious boy from the city. As soon as MS Rhodes dismissed the committee for the afternoon, Jinhua collected her belongings and walked outside into the main concourse of the old mall. Harpreet followed close behind, flashing a wry smile, looking at her in a way that mocked and demanded to know what she was thinking. Out of earshot of the other students and Daniel, she pulled Jinhua aside and said in an ear-splitting whisper, "Damn, you were practically drooling when you looked at him during the entire session. You like him, don't you?" Jinhua's gaze fell to a cracked tile on the floor beside her right foot. The crack exposed a layer of brownish old concrete and what would have otherwise been uniform patterns of teal triangles. "Maybe I do. I don't know. I guess I don't know anything about him yet," small smile crept onto her face. What do you mean you don't know anything? You know he's super cute and looks like Captain America from the old Marvel movies. What more do you need than that? Jinhua laughed louder than she expected to. Good point, she admitted, her gaze rising to meet Harpreet's eyes once again. What should I do? Physics and ripboarding I can handle, but boys aren't really my thing. That is true. You are hopeless when it comes to the male species. Remember that boy Davian from Space Camp back in the day? Harpreet shook her head. That was poor form. Hey, I was like 10 back then. Who knew who would turn out to be a booger eater? Jinhua protested. You're welcome that I saved you from that one, Harpreet said triumphantly. Jinhua looked back toward the committee room. Daniel seemed to be discussing something privately with MS Rhodes. He looked like he was shifting his weight to leave the room. Be serious for once. What should I do? Jinhua said, her tone pleading. Well, you should start by inviting him to come to Star of India with us for lunch. What if he doesn't like Indian food? Everybody likes Indian food. I don't know. What if he's just one of the few people in the world that doesn't like it? Maybe we should just go to the river. Or maybe to the movies. Jinhua's face distorted with confusion. A rare emotion for her. Harpreet gave an impatient sigh. Jinhua's tolerance for risk was high in almost every area of her life, except when it came to people. Her friend was cautious, almost overly so, afraid of the potential messiness that was often paired with close relationships, especially potential romantic ones. Sometimes she wondered how they had become close friends at all. She pushed those thoughts aside and adopted her gentle big sister tone. Hey, why don't we just invite him to the river with us? Us? Jinhua's bewilderment gave way to levity. What is this us all of a sudden? Why do you need to be there? You know, so I can make sure he's not an asshole or something. He's the product and I'm quality control. I have to make sure he's not defective, you know? If he is, then we'll return him. She swung both of her arms as if tossing a dripping bag of garbage into a waste chute, with little care for where or how it landed. Jinhua's lips formed a light-hearted smile. You mean so you can be nosy and see if anything happens between us? Harpreet feigned astonishment. Me? Nosy? Never. But somebody has to look after you. Suddenly, Harpreet fell silent and made a small pointing gesture toward the door to the committee room. Peeking out of the side of her eyes, Jinhua followed her finger to see Daniel emerge from the room. He adjusted the straps on his small backpack and began to rotate his head from side to side, most likely searching for the exit of the community center. Despite her effort to avoid them, his hazel eyes locked with hers for a second. A fleeting grin ran across his face. Damn it, he's seen me. She felt the urge to leave the community center, but her thought process was interrupted by Harpreet's boisterous voice. Hey, Daniel! You need some help finding the way out? She waved at him with excitement. Oh no, he's coming over here. Damn you, Harpreet. Jinhua felt the muscles in her back and abdomen tense, bracing herself for the now inevitable first encounter with the boy. Daniel's smile beamed as he cadenced steps toward them. His almond hair swayed to an inaudible rhythm as he appeared to glide across the floor. Harpreet reached out an eager hand to shake his. "Hi, I'm Harpreet, and this is Jinhua. Welcome to the only physics committee in Yuba City." Her hand remained suspended in the air for some time as Daniel studied it. He seemed unsure how to respond to the gesture. Harpreet held her hand out. Jinhua held her breath. Seconds later, he returned the handshake. The firmness of his clasp projected strength and confidence. So far, so good, Harpreet thought. "Hello, nice to meet you." The tone of his voice was resonant and clear, with a touch of bass. He would have been a successful podcaster back in the day, Jinhua mused. Standing to the left and slightly behind Harpreet, she could see him in stunning detail. Up close, his erect posture was evident, transmitting poise and dignity. A detail Jinhua had not noticed before from the seated vantage point of her desk. The skin on his face glowed with a touch of tan, perfectly unblemished. A well-sized nose and a flawlessly cut jawline contributed to his attractiveness. His good looks and serious demeanor made him more than a little intimidating. "So, Daniel," Harpreet began, with a playful tone, "would you like to come with us to Star of India?" "What is that?" Daniel gave a perplexed look. "It's only the best Indian restaurant this side of the Feather River. You know, we figured you might be hungry after listening to all that boring lecturing back there." Another long pause punctuated the silence between them. The only things Jinhua could hear clearly were the sound of a loud, echoing conversation towards the intersection of the concourse of the mall, and her own fluttering heartbeat. She feared it might be visible to Daniel and any onlooker. "I'm sorry, but I can't. I have soccer practice this afternoon." He shifted his weight to turn and go. Harpreet opened her mouth, most likely to protest. But the sound of Jinhua's voice cut through the silence and the ambient sounds of the old mall. "Hey, maybe we could meet at the river after your practice. What time does it end?" She managed an inquisitive tone, despite the overwhelming desire she had to shut up and let Harpreet speak for her. Daniel stopped and turned to face her. He seemed to be unsure if he should answer the question or not. "At 3 p.m. A look of alarm appeared on Harpreet's face. What is she doing? "Okay, do you mind if..." Jinhua had to consciously prevent her words from spilling out of her mouth. "I meet you near the riverbank at Riverfront Park at 4? Daniel smiled brightly. "Sure, let's do it." He extended his hand in a smooth gesture of acceptance. This time, it was Jinhua who delayed 5 seconds before returning the handshake. To her, it was a long time, but Daniel didn't seem to register the odd gap. "It was nice to meet you, Jinhua. I'll see you later at the river around 4. With that, he turned and walked toward the center of the concourse. Jinhua watched him depart, eyes glued to his athletic buttocks. The tightness of his jeans made her breath catch in her throat, freezing her temporarily in place. It wasn't until he turned right toward the exit and disappeared from view that her breathing returned to normal, reanimating her entire body. Harpreet stared at her friend, mouth open in disbelief. Then she began to clap her hands in a congratulatory manner. Wow, I must say, I'm impressed. Didn't expect for you to go for it straight out like that. Jinhua returned a confident, toothy grin. You know I have to go to temple at 4, right? So I won't be there to back you up. Jinhua let out a low giggle and slapped her arm. That's why I chose the time. Harpreet shook her head while her laugh reflected off the walls. So magra.